The Kansas wind howled across the prairie as rancher Daniel McKenna stepped onto his porch, squinting against the dust storm that had been raging for 3 days. His cattle operation was one of the most successful in the territory, but success meant nothing when you ate beans from a can every night, and your shirts hadn't seen proper washing in months. Through the swirling dust, he spotted a figure approaching on foot along the main road. As the shape drew closer, Daniel realized it was a woman, walking slowly and deliberately despite the harsh wind. Something about her determined pace made him watch more carefully. She was young, maybe 25, with auburn hair that whipped around her face and a simple dress that had seen better days. But what struck Daniel most was her posture. Despite whatever hardships had brought her to his remote ranch, she carried herself with quiet dignity. As she reached his gate, the woman looked up at Daniel with green eyes that held both desperation and hope. "Excuse me, sir," she called out, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Are you Mr. McKenna?" "I am," Daniel replied, stepping down from the porch. "What can I do for you, miss?" The woman took a deep breath, as if gathering courage for what she was about to say. "My name is Sarah Collins. I heard in town that you might be looking for help with cooking and housekeeping." Daniel nodded. Word had indeed gotten around that the bachelor rancher was in desperate need of domestic help. His last housekeeper had married and moved to California 6 months ago. Leaving him to fend for himself, Sarah stepped closer, and Daniel could see the exhaustion in her face, the way her clothes hung loose as if she hadn't been eating regularly. "Do you need a cook?" she whispered, her voice carrying a vulnerability that tugged at something in Daniel's chest. "Well, Daniel began, but then Sarah shifted slightly, and he saw something that made his words die in his throat. Strapped to her back with a makeshift sling was a baby. The child couldn't have been more than 6 months old, with wispy brown hair and the peaceful expression of deep sleep despite the howling wind. Daniel froze. In his 42 years, he'd encountered just about every situation the frontier could throw at a man. He'd faced down rustlers, survived blizzards, and built a successful ranch from nothing. But the sight of this woman with a baby on her back, asking for work, hit him like a physical blow. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I didn't realize that. You have a child?" Sarah's face flushed with embarrassment and defiance. "Her name is Emma. She's 6 months old, and she's no trouble. She sleeps most of the day, and I can work around her schedule. I'm a good cook, Mr. McKenna. I can keep house, tend a garden, and I work harder than any man you'd hire." Daniel found himself staring at the baby, whose tiny fist had emerged from the blanket wrapped around her. Something about the child's helpless innocence stirred memories he'd tried to bury for 20 years. "Where's her father?" he asked, though he immediately regretted the question when he saw Sarah's face tighten. "Gone," Sarah said simply. "It's just Emma and me now." Daniel looked at the woman and child standing at his gate, refugees from whatever tragedy had brought them to his doorstep. Every practical instinct told him to politely decline and send them on their way. A ranch was no place for a baby, and he'd built his life around solitude and routine. But something deeper than practicality was stirring in his chest. 20 years ago, he'd lost his own wife and infant son to fever. He'd sworn never to open his heart to that kind of pain again, had built walls around himself that no one had been able to breach. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "I'm not sure this would be a suitable arrangement." Sarah's shoulders sagged slightly, but she didn't give up. "Mr. McKenna, I can see you're a good man. Your ranch is well kept, your cattle look healthy. You're successful because you make good decisions. I'm asking you to make one more." She adjusted the baby on her back, and Emma stirred slightly, making a small sound that could have been contentment or mild protest. "I'll work for room and board for both of us," Sarah continued. "I won't ask for wages until I've proven my worth. I know you don't know me from Adam, but I'm asking you to take a chance on us." Daniel found himself studying Sarah's face, seeing the strength beneath the desperation, the fierce protectiveness in her eyes when she spoke about her daughter. "Where have you been staying?" he asked. "The hotel in town, when I can afford it." Sarah admitted, "When I can't." She gestured vaguely toward the open prairie. The thought of this woman and baby sleeping rough on the Kansas plains made Daniel's stomach clench. Whatever reservations he had about the arrangement, he couldn't send them back to that. "Come inside," he said finally. "We'll talk about this properly." Relief flooded Sarah's face as she followed Daniel toward the ranch house. As they walked, Emma woke up and began to fuss slightly, making the soft sounds that babies make when they're not quite ready to cry but want attention. "SHH, sweetheart," Sarah murmured, reaching back to pat the baby gently. "We're almost somewhere safe." Daniel heard those words and felt something crack inside his chest. Somewhere safe. When was the last time anyone had looked at his ranch as a refuge, rather than just a business operation? Subscribe to our channel for more incredible frontier stories. You won't believe how this unexpected family changes everything. As they entered the ranch house, Daniel was suddenly aware of how Spartan his life had become. The furniture was functional but worn. The kitchen clean, but clearly the domain of a man who viewed cooking as a necessary chore, rather than an art. Sarah looked around with the eye of someone evaluating both challenges and possibilities. "It's a good house," she said diplomatically. "Solid construction, good bones, with a little attention. It could use a woman's touch," Daniel finished, echoing something his mother had said about bachelor quarters decades ago. Emma chose that moment to wake up fully and announce her displeasure with a healthy cry that filled the room. Sarah immediately began the practice dance of a mother soothing her child, bouncing slightly and making gentle shushing sounds. Daniel watched this maternal routine with fascination and pain. It had been so long since his house had heard the sounds of family life that he'd forgotten how those simple domestic moments could fill a space with warmth. "She's hungry," Sarah explained, looking around for somewhere appropriate to nurse. "If you could there's a rocking chair in the parlor," Daniel said quickly, pointing toward the front room. "You can have privacy there." As Sarah disappeared to tend to her daughter, Daniel stood alone in his kitchen and realized that his carefully ordered life was about to change dramatically. The question was whether that change would heal old wounds or tear them open again. Through the walls, he could hear Sarah's soft voice talking to Emma, and despite himself, Daniel found the sound comforting. For the first time in 20 years, his house didn't feel empty. But accepting Sarah and Emma's presence meant more than just hiring domestic help. It meant opening his heart to the possibility of caring about people again, and that was a risk that terrified him more than any frontier danger he'd ever faced. An hour later, Sarah emerged from the parlor with Emma calm and content, looking around at Daniel with the bright curiosity that babies show when they're well-fed and comfortable. Daniel found himself staring at the child's face, searching for some sign of who she might become, some indication of the life she might have. "She's beautiful," he said softly, surprising himself with the words. Sarah's face lit up with the pride that only mothers understand. "She's my whole world," she said simply. "Everything I do is for her." Daniel gestured toward the kitchen table. "Sit down. Let's talk about what this arrangement would look like." As Sarah settled into a chair with Emma in her lap, Daniel found himself studying them both. The baby was clearly healthy and well cared for despite their circumstances, which spoke well of Sarah's character. And Sarah herself, now that he could see her clearly in good light, had the kind of competent, intelligent expression that suggested she'd be capable of handling the challenges of ranch life. "First question," Daniel said, "can you actually cook? Because I've been living on beans and hardtack for 6 months, and if you're exaggerating your skills." Sarah smiled for the first time since arriving. "Mr. McKenna, I can turn a tough piece of beef into something so tender it'll fall apart with a fork. I can make bread that would make your mother weep, and I can stretch $1's worth of ingredients into a feast that'll feed 6 hungry cowboys. That's quite a claim. It's quite a skill." Sarah replied confidently. "My mother ran a boarding house in Missouri before she married my father. I learned cooking the way most girls learn sewing." Daniel nodded, impressed by her confidence. "What about the other work? Washing, cleaning, tending the vegetable garden?" "I can do all of that," Sarah assured him. "The only thing I ask is that you understand Emma comes first. If she's sick or needs attention, everything else waits." "That's reasonable," Daniel agreed. though privately he wondered how practical that would be during busy seasons, when timing was everything. Emma chose that moment to grab a handful of Sarah's hair and attempt to eat it, causing both adults to laugh despite the serious nature of their conversation. "What about living arrangements?" Daniel asked. "The house has 4 bedrooms, but only one is set up for use. You and Emma would need. One room would be perfect," Sarah said quickly. "We don't need much space." Daniel found himself thinking about the unused nursery upstairs, the room he'd prepared 20 years ago for the son who'd never lived to occupy it. The idea of a baby's cry coming from that room again was both appealing and terrifying. "There's a room on the 2nd floor that might work," he said carefully. "It would need some cleaning and furniture, but it has good light and it's close to the main bedroom." "That sounds wonderful," Sarah said, then hesitated. "Mr. McKenna, I need to ask about wages. Not for myself, but for Emma. I need to save money. For her future, for her education." "What were you thinking?" Sarah took a deep breath. "Room and board for both of us, plus $15 a month. I know it's not much, but—" "25, Daniel interrupted. Sarah's eyes widened. "I can't ask you to. You didn't ask. I offered. A good cook is worth her weight in gold out. Here, and if you can handle the other household responsibilities as well." He shrugged. "It's a fair wage." Emma had been quietly playing with her mother's hair, but now she turned to look at Daniel with the solemn attention that babies sometimes give to strangers. Their eyes met, and Daniel felt something shift inside his chest. "She's studying you," Sarah observed with amusement. "Probably wondering why this strange man is talking so much," Daniel replied. But he didn't look away from Emma's intent gaze. The baby reached out one tiny hand toward Daniel, fingers opening and closing in the universal infant gesture that meant, "Come here." Without thinking, Daniel extended his finger, and Emma immediately grasped it with surprising strength. "She likes you," Sarah said softly. "She's usually shy with strangers." Daniel looked down at the tiny hand wrapped around his finger and felt 20 years of carefully maintained emotional distance begin to crumble. This wasn't just about hiring domestic help anymore. This was about allowing people into his life who could hurt him if something went wrong. Subscribe to our channel now. The touching moments that follow will melt your heart. "Mr. McKenna," Sarah said quietly, "I can see this isn't easy for you. If having a baby in the house brings up painful memories." Daniel looked up at her, surprised by her perceptiveness. "How did you know?" "The way you look at Emma, like you're seeing a ghost." Sarah's voice was gentle but direct. "You lost a child." It wasn't a question, and Daniel found himself nodding despite his intention to keep his past private. "My wife and son," he said simply. 20 years ago. Fever took them both in the same week." Sarah's face filled with compassion. "I'm sorry. I can't imagine. I thought I couldn't either." Daniel admitted, "Until today, when I saw you with Emma, it made me remember what I'd forgotten about how precious these little ones are." Emma, oblivious to the emotional weight of the conversation, had decided that Daniel's finger was fascinating and was now attempting to bring it to her mouth for further investigation. "She's teething," Sarah explained with a laugh. "Everything goes in the mouth these days." Daniel gently extracted his finger, but not before Emma gave him a gummy smile that went straight to his heart. "All right," he said, making his decision. "Let's try this arrangement. 1-month trial period to see how we all get along. If it works out, we'll make it permanent." "Thank you," Sarah said, and Daniel could hear the relief in her voice. "You won't regret this." "I hope not," Daniel replied, though he was already wondering if he was making the biggest mistake of his life or the best decision he'd made in 20 years. As Sarah began discussing practical details like shopping for supplies and organizing the kitchen, Daniel found himself watching Emma, who had dozed off in her mother's arms. The sight of a sleeping baby in his house stirred emotions he'd thought were buried forever. He'd spent decades building walls around his heart, but in the space of one afternoon, a desperate woman and her innocent child had found a way through his defenses. The question now was whether opening his heart again would heal old wounds or create new ones. Either way, for the first time in 20 years, Daniel McKenna's house was going to be a home again. 3 months later, The McKenna ranch had been transformed in ways that Daniel never could have imagined. The house that had been a functional bachelor's quarters was now filled with the sounds, smells, and warmth of family life. Sarah had proven to be everything she'd promised and more. The kitchen produced meals that had the ranch hands making excuses to linger around the main house. The vegetable garden flourished under her care, and every room in the house showed evidence of a woman's attention to detail and comfort. But it was Emma who had brought the most dramatic changes to Daniel's life. The baby had grown from the quiet 6-month-old who'd arrived strapped to her mother's back into an active, curious 9-month-old who was attempting to crawl and getting into everything within reach. Her laughter filled the house, and her presence had awakened something in Daniel that he'd thought was dead forever. Emma babbled from her high chair as Daniel entered the kitchen. For breakfast, reaching out her chubby arms toward him. "She's not calling you Daddy," Sarah said quickly, though her smile suggested she found the situation amusing rather than concerning. "She just likes the sound." Daniel picked up Emma and settled her on his knee, a routine that had developed over the past month. "Morning, little one," he said softly. "What's for breakfast today?" "Pancakes," Sarah announced, flipping golden circles on the griddle. "And before you ask, yes, I made extra for the hands. Cookie Williams has been dropping hints about my cooking for weeks." Daniel laughed, bouncing Emma gently on his knee. In 3 months, Sarah had not only revolutionized his domestic life, but had also become the social center of the ranch. The cowboys, who'd initially been tongue-tied around a proper lady, now competed to help with repairs around the house and eagerly volunteered for any errand that might earn them one of Sarah's meals. "Speaking of the hens," Daniel said, "they've been asking if you might consider making your apple pies for the harvest celebration next month." "I suppose I could," Sarah replied, though Daniel could see she was pleased by the request. "If someone could help me pick apples from those trees behind the barn." "Consider it done," Daniel said, then looked down as Emma grabbed his nose and squealed with delight. This had become their morning routine, breakfast together, Emma entertaining them with her babbling and exploration, Sarah efficiently managing both cooking and motherhood while keeping up a stream of conversation about ranch business and local news. But Daniel could see something changing in Sarah's expression lately, a thoughtfulness that suggested she was wrestling with some internal question. "Sarah," he said as she set a plate of perfect pancakes in front of him, "is everything all right? You've seemed distracted lately." Sarah paused in wiping down the counter, and Daniel saw her take a deep breath before turning to face him. "Actually, Daniel, there's something I need to talk to you about." The serious tone in her voice made Daniel's stomach clench. In 3 months, Sarah had become so integral to his life that the thought of her leaving filled him with panic. "What is it?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. That Sarah sat down across from him, reaching out to smooth Emma's hair as the baby continued her attempts to dismantle Daniel's shirt buttons. "I've been thinking about Emma's future," Sarah began, "about what kind of life I can give her here, what opportunities she'll have." "She'll have every opportunity," Daniel said quickly. "There's talk of a school starting in town, and when she's older, if she wants to go to college." "Daniel," Sarah interrupted gently, "that's not what I'm worried about." She was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts, while Emma provided a soundtrack of happy babbling. "What I'm worried about," Sarah continued, "is what happens when you decide you want a wife, a real wife, not just a housekeeper who happens to live here." Daniel felt as if the air had been knocked out of his lungs. "Sarah, I know this arrangement was supposed to be temporary," she continued, "and I know you're a good man who deserves to find love and have a family of your own. But when that happens, where does that leave Emma and me?" Daniel stared at Sarah across the kitchen table, with Emma contentedly playing in his lap, and realized that somewhere in the past 3 months, his feelings had evolved far beyond employer and employee. "Sarah," he said quietly, "what if I told you I think I already have found love and family?" Sarah's eyes widened, and Daniel saw hope and fear warring in her expression. What are you saying?" Daniel looked down at Emma, who chose that moment to look up at him with complete trust and affection, then back at Sarah, whose presence had brought light and warmth into his carefully guarded life. I'm saying that I love you," he said simply. "Both of you. I'm saying that this house has been more of a home in the past 3 months than it was in the 20 years before you arrived." Subscribe to our channel for more incredible frontier love stories. You won't believe how beautifully this family story concludes. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Daniel, you don't have to." "I'm not saying it because I have to," Daniel interrupted. "I'm saying it because it's true. I love your strength, your kindness, the way you make every day brighter just by being here. And I love Emma as if she were my own daughter, as if she understood the importance of the moment." Emma reached up and patted Daniel's cheek with her tiny hand, then turned to smile at her mother. "I love you too," Sarah whispered. "I have for weeks, but I was afraid to hope." "Then let's stop being afraid," Daniel said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Marry me, Sarah. Let's make this family official." Sarah's tears spilled over as she nodded. Unable to speak, Emma, sensing the emotional weight of the moment, clapped her hands and squealed with delight, as if she approved of the arrangements being made on her behalf. 6 months later, the McKenna Ranch hosted the biggest wedding celebration the territory had seen in years. Sarah wore a dress that the ladies of the town had spent weeks helping her sew, and Emma, now walking and getting into everything, served as flower girl by toddling down the aisle and scattering petals in her wake. As Daniel and Sarah exchanged vows in front of their friends and neighbors, Emma stood between them, holding onto both their hands and babbling commentary that made the entire congregation laugh. "Do you, Daniel McKenna, take Sarah and Emma Collins to be your wife and daughter, to love and protect for as long as you all shall live?" the preacher asked. "I do," Daniel replied, looking down at Emma, who grinned up at him and said, "Ah." With perfect timing, when Sarah had whispered, "Do you need a cook?" She'd been asking for so much more than a job. She'd been asking for a chance at the kind of life she'd dreamed of for her daughter. And when Daniel had frozen at the sight of the baby on her back, he'd been confronting fears he'd carried for 20 years. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories of love, family, and second chances from the American frontier. Hit that subscribe button now, because these tales prove that sometimes the most unexpected families are the strongest ones. But love, they discovered, was stronger than fear. And sometimes the family you choose is more powerful than the one you're born into. As they celebrated their wedding with friends and neighbors, Daniel held Emma while she slept against his shoulder, and Sarah leaned into his other arm, and all 3 of them knew they'd found exactly what they'd been searching for: a place to belong, people to love, and the kind of home that's built not just with walls and a roof, but with trust, commitment, and the daily choice to care for each other. Your subscription helps us continue bringing these incredible tales of frontier families to life. Subscribe now and join us for more amazing stories that prove love comes in all forms and finds us when we need it most.